Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the sheep pen. No goats allowed. So, this is another in this series of the truth that I'm going to drop on you and the releasing of this message that God gave me. And this is going to be a big part of it. Now, a lot of you have seen where I'm headed, and some of you were already there, and now I'm filling in the blanks for you. And some of you have figured it out along the way, and a few of you have emailed me, and I've kind of opened up to you via email. I will cut to the chase via email if I feel like someone is ready to hear the message. And one of the reasons I'm being very careful about releasing this message is that with it comes I won't call it a backlash, I'll call it a reaction. And I'm not even afraid of the negative reactions. I'm not afraid of the people that reject the message. I'm being very careful for the people who receive the message. And this is one of the reasons why I've been fighting with God for years about starting this ministry and releasing this message. Because there is a reaction to it that can, on its surface, seem very scary. That when you release somebody of some of this religious bondage, it can cause a person to, I used to say, twist off, go wild, take a trip on the sin wagon, right? But now God has really been dealing with me about that. And what really happens is that people are who they are. And Jesus taught us that who we are in our thought life is who we are in our soul. And thinking and dwelling on and engaging in things that are bad for us are just as bad as doing the things. And really, our heart is what Jesus sees, not our actions. Our actions are just a continuation of our thought life. And so these people that had a momentary reaction to this truth that I've shared with them in the past when I've dropped this bomb on people, Jesus helped me to see, the Holy Spirit showed me that this was not somebody twisting off. This was somebody finally being who they are. And in doing so, in engaging in this freedom for a season, they find themselves. They purge their spirit. They no longer are just serving God out of fear. But what happens is in the process, they decide to serve Jesus and to serve the good, the light side of the world, of the universe. Not because they're afraid of hell, but because they're excited for heaven. That's the thing that I can express to you. You should not serve God out of fear of hell. You should serve God out of for the desire and the vision to attain heaven. Heaven can be had on earth. The kingdom of heaven is now. The Bible tells us the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All you have to do is reach out your hand and take it. If I say that I have a tool that I keep on hand, or an item that I keep on hand, it doesn't mean it's in a storage unit 100 miles away. It means it's right here. If your firearm is at hand, it's right there where you can pick it up. It's in your hand. All you have to do is to utilize it. And so the kingdom of heaven is there for you. And I'm going to get into in a future video about the definition of the kingdom of heaven, because the kingdom is not heaven, although heaven is part of the kingdom. So many people are confused about that. But before I can build this for you, I have to deprogram many of you. Many of you are going to be resistant to this message because in some ways it seems like the opposite of everything that every other preacher is teaching. And all I can say to that is, if their method works, how come we're losing? If their method works, how come this world is filled with hate and selfishness and sadistic behavior? Why are people so cruel? Why are the people in your church cruel? Why is your pastor and his wife cruel to people? Why are the people in the church cruel to each other? Why do we live in this cruel world? It's because their system of the law, sin, and death does not work. That you don't accomplish a thing when you scare people into serving Jesus. They won't do anything but sit in the corner and make sure that they keep their robe so clean that they can't be rejected, when in reality they've already been accepted. And they should be in the business of spreading the gospel of love, of peace, of acceptance. They should be working to offer other people the same gift of grace that God offered them. But instead, they live in fear, afraid of the retribution, working to try to get themselves out of hell, when hell is only for the devil, his angels, and those who align themselves with that cruelty and evilness. And so to do that, I've kind of got to go back to the beginning and show you where all of this came from for me. Because this starts, for me, with this book that these people worship. Make no bones about it. These people worship every word of this book while ignoring the true spirit of Jesus. They're not in spirit and in truth. They're just locked up and wrapped up in a book. It's not even one book. It's 66 books that have been bound together in antiquity. And they take them as a whole. The whole Bible concept is the root of the deception. And I have to break it down for you. I have to, in some ways, I have to cleave you away from this book so that you can grasp the meaning of this book. That the meaning gets lost in the interpretations, in the minutia, in the dot and the tittle, as the theologians say. Do you know that the East and West, that one time the church was unified? It was one church. And it's the first split in the church happened when the East split from the West, and it was over a period. Is it a period or is it a comma? Literally, nations were divided over that book and whether one of the phrases in that book was a period or a comma. Wars were fought. People died over that period and that comma. Kingdoms crumbled over that period and that comma. And so, through all of this, they can't see the forest for the trees. They can't see the love of Christ because they are so busy interpreting the dots and the tittles, while ignoring the big chunks of the Bible that are missing that shouldn't be. So what I want to talk to you about today, and I promised you with this series would come confessions. So the first confession is, although some of the coffee talks were things I didn't necessarily believe in but found interesting, a great number, a significant number of coffee talks on this channel over the past 4 years have been things that I wholeheartedly believe in. But I presented them to you from a position of skepticism, because a lot of times you try to sell something to someone and they're going to resist it on its face simply because it's being sold to them. So by presenting it as a skeptic, it was a tool that I used to teach you some things without you knowing I was teaching you some things. And one of the things that I've talked about that I think I presented as a coffee talk was the missing years of Jesus. This was very interesting to me, that there's this black hole of knowledge about Jesus from the time that he is bar mitzvahed at the age of 12. He goes and his parents his mother loses track of him because he is in the temple and he is debating with and contending with and fishing for information and finding how much do these holy men of the Jewish council really know. And the Bible says that he confounded them, and they were astonished at a young boy, a young man, having this much knowledge of the ways of God and the spirit realm. And so then Jesus disappears from the scene until he's in his 30s. So that is just absent from the Bible. There just is a giant hole there. While everybody is arguing over a dot and a tittle, where everybody is worshiping this book, they cannot see that there's a giant, significant portion of this book that is missing. The story, the biography, The biography channel would not present a biography of someone who lived to be in their 30s and they only hear about their childhood and then 3.5 years of their life. People want to know what's in the middle, but for some reason, nobody's ever asked that. And when they do, they were like, oh, well, he was just being a normal guy working as a carpenter. And I've talked about in previous videos how that's impossible in the Jewish culture. Jesus would have had to have been married to live a life as a craftsman. They didn't let unmarried men hang around the neighborhood. Everybody got married. They got married young, and because they were trying to prevent broken marriages and adultery. And so single people were not allowed in this culture. If a woman became widowed, she was immediately married off, even if she had to marry her husband's brother to make it happen. Right? We know this. If you're a Bible scholar, you know this is how things were. So it's ridiculous to sell to me that Jesus was living around his family as a single man making furniture. That wouldn't even have been looked at with anything but suspicion even up until the 1950s. In the 1950s, a guy that lived like that into his 30s was either gay or he was a player, right? Or maybe he wasn't right in his head. Those were your choices right up until recent times, right before I was born. And so it's just impossible. It just doesn't jive. It stinks of editing. The Bible was edited. Jesus' story was edited. Things were intentionally left out, which led me to the narration that exists. And just for the record, a lot of people that have been contacting me via email and other on the message boards, they want to get into the minutia of the Old Testament. They want to start trying to break the Bible down in the Old Testament. They want to talk about how the creation story is prevalent in every culture. There's a creation story, and they all are similar. And some of this stuff comes from Sumerian texts before it was even thought about to be in the Jewish Torah. That the Jewish Torah was preceded by these Sumerian texts that talk about a lot of the events of the Old Testament. I don't want to get into all of that because, as you know, I've taken the Old Testament, put it over here as a Jewish book. And I am concerned with who was Jesus Christ and what did he come here to do and why did his message take hold and how is his message relevant today. So I'm looking at the New Testament and the New Testament only. So there's this giant hole where Jesus' life is just missing. Aren't you suspicious? Haven't you ever, it's kind of like when you realize that little plastic square that they put in the pizza box is not a table for dolls, that it's not a toy or a trinket, that it was there to keep the pizza box from collapsing on your pizza. Light bulb moment, right? Haven't you had the light bulb moment about the missing years of Jesus and where he was? Which leads me to the coffee talk. Jesus was a Buddhist. I wholeheartedly believe that Jesus spent that time amongst Buddhists and Hindus, that he took his message that he had to spread from his homeland. And I've uncovered this through archaeological studies, through historical studies that are of a non-biblical nature. And the end of the trip, the end of the rainbow for me, is that Jesus starts in Jerusalem at the day of his bar mitzvah. And these missing years accumulate with him ending up in Tibet. While in Tibet, while staying with Buddhists in the forbidden city, in the secret city, in the top of the Tibetan mountains, okay, the top of the world. You've seen this place depicted in movies, although I don't know that a camera crew has ever actually gone in. But there's a book that they will openly tell you that they possess, and it's called The Sayings of Isis, which is their interpretation of the word Yeshua or Jesus. Isis, it's a Latin carryover. I think most people knew Jesus not as Yeshua, as he was known in the Aramaic language, but the Latin version of his name is Jesus. And in the loose Latin world where Latin was used but not widely spoken by everyone but understood by most to some degree, Isis was the natural translations. This is what they call him. It's clearly Jesus. The writing is clearly Jesus. And it is the things that I am bringing you. I am bringing you what was found in that Buddhist book that Jesus wrote, that he thought was the most important. See, Jesus didn't write the Gospels. The Gospels were written by people who observed him and reported back on his life and teachings. But what's interesting is what Jesus did write is the red letter parts. The red letter parts of the Bible coincide perfectly with this Sayings of Isis book that was released 100 years ago by the Buddhists who had been protecting it since the time of Christ. So that was no coffee talk. There's one of my first confessions, is that I used a little bit of, I won't call it tricked you, I'll call it coming at you from a different angle so that you could hear what I had to say instead of being resistant. So I do believe that Jesus traveled the world, that he brought his message to the world before he came home to finish it where it started, before he came full circle. So I have broken down the Bible. I've rejected the entire Old Testament, not as worthless, but as not pertinent to what Jesus came to say and do. That he came here to not dismiss, but fulfill the old law, put an end to it, and like I said, bring us the better, bigger deal of the gospel of peace and love and forgiveness. That this is the true gospel. And the sayings of Jesus in the red letters, his actual teachings, bear no resemblance to what you're being taught in these churches. These churches bear much more resemblance to a Jewish synagogue. They're much more in line with the Jewish faith than they are with the teachings of Christ. And the disconnect in our religion, the thing that causes many people to reject Christianity, is the inconsistency. And there's an inconsistency in this amalgamation, this combination, this brew that they've created of Judaism and the law and what Jesus taught, when in fact the two things are not at all copacetic. They do not harmonize. They are two different faiths. The cognitive dissonance in a Christian's life, the cognitive dissonance in these churches, the reason the church is scattered, the reason why we are losing this fight is because of that contradictory nature, where it seems like God and Jesus, that the Jewish faith of the Old Testament and the New Testament are in opposition to one another, and people have spent 2,000 years trying to put them in alignment, and they can't. Not in any real bulletproof way. It's why the Christian faith is easy to unravel and undo, and many intellectuals walk away from it because it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense because of the cognitive dissonance. It shouldn't make sense. People have created, and you're going to find out I'm hard on Paul, right? I reject most of the New Testament as a method of making doctrine, because what doesn't jive with the greatest commandment, we talked about in the last video, what doesn't align with love, what doesn't align with Jesus' message, has to be rejected. And I don't care if you think the books are holy. I'm not saying they're not useful. I do find Paul's writings concerning him grappling with this concept of works versus grace, and faith versus works, and salvation and the law versus freedom from the law. And honestly, he's the author of this confusion, this cognitive dissonance, because he himself, as a member of the Sanhedrin, as one of the highest, and you guys need to understand who Paul was. And I think a lot of that is not taught in the church. And part of it is you kind of got to go to Josephus, the Roman historian, who cataloged this eventful time in Jewish history. He chronicled it. And you have to kind of go back to him, and you have to get rid of what's called sola scriptura. As long as they keep you locked into that 66 book cage, and they don't let you verify, get any clarification, or look anywhere else in history to answer these big questions, you will always be lost in the confusion, and you'll always be knitting together this patchwork quilt of faith that doesn't ever quite look like a blanket and offers you little or no comfort. Well, I may have to edit. We'll see. I may let that slide through there. Um, I got a message on here that they're going to pause my video, but maybe it didn't pause. If so, not, we're just going to truck right through it. So what I did was distill Jesus's words down and decipher the meaning of them. And the message I'm giving you is this meaning. And the first clue was the complete lack of any history in Jesus's early life, that you go straight from childhood, and even his childhood has huge chunks missing in it. So this led me to other sources like Josephus. And I was on something here to do with Josephus when my phone gave me the glitch. Bear with me. When you go outside of the Bible, you start to get these answers fulfilled. And it led me to reach out to other books that were, quote unquote, banned from the Bible. So let's talk about that banning process. Let's talk about where the 66 books came from, how we solidified this, what we call Christianity, into this modern hybrid chimera of faith, right? Chimera of faith, like a liger, like it's when you take two things and put them together. And the thing about when you take two animals, like a donkey and a horse, and cross them, the offspring can't produce fruit. The offspring cannot produce children of their own, right? The offspring of their own. And it's impossible to breed mules. Mules have to be a crossbreed between a horse and a donkey. And what you have is this crossbreed religion. But when you leave the area of the Bible and you go out into these other forgotten books of the Bible, you start to get the true picture. When you leave into Jewish history, you start to get the true picture. And these are some of the things that are being concealed in the Vatican Library. The proof of Jesus' real message has been absolutely intentionally suppressed. And people have chose Paul and other church fathers that you've not heard the name of, but who are responsible for forming doctrine. They have placed them above Jesus and rejected his message, because Jesus' message does not require clergy. Jesus' message does not require these confessors. It doesn't require communion. I'm not throwing communion under the bus. I understand the power of that act, and it's one I believe in, along with baptism, but they're not required. Speaking in tongues is wonderful. I believe in it. It's the real thing. I will probably teach on that in the future. Casting out demons is one of the most powerful things we have as a Christian for freeing the bound and freeing the lost and helping people find themselves and their ways and battle their own demons, literally, right? But it's not required. The thief on the cross taught us the only thing that is required is love. Be willing to put your neck on the line for another person out of love for them. Compassion. Empathy. This is what was important to Jesus. This is the core message. I almost want to hit you with the big story, but let's go back to the big lie. That's what we were talking about here. How you've been deceived. And omitting Jesus' known life, his trips to the Far East, which are documented in other places, that's a heresy. That's a disservice to humanity to cover that up. I believe there's lots of things in there and lots of reasons why they wanted to cover up his life, because I believe that Jesus was not bound by this law, and nor did he attempt to live by it. The Bible is filled with his minor transgressions against the law, teaching and preaching on Sundays. Not Sunday, excuse me. There's another lie we'll have to get to, is what's the real Sabbath and the meaning of it. But he would go and he would work on Sabbath day. He would pick food out of the field while no one was supposed to move out of their beds. Sabbath was so sacred that they would let their animals starve on that day. They would cook their food the day before so they didn't have to do anything but consume it, and so no work was engaged in. But Jesus would work. He would heal, he would preach, he would teach, he would feed himself, he would keep walking, he would keep traveling. He did not recognize, nor did Jesus honor the Sabbath. And you are going to have to come to terms with that, you Ten Commandment people. That this Jesus that I serve, he didn't keep that one. Because he's not bound by the law of sin and death. He's bound by the law of love. It's the law of love that makes you say, okay, I know I'm supposed to rest, but that animal needs me to take care of him right now. He's suffering. Right? I know that this is the Sabbath, but I didn't prepare ahead of time, so I'm going to pick some grain, grind it up into flour, and make some bread today because I'm hungry. And that's what's best for me. Jesus said, the Sabbath is for man. Man is not for the Sabbath. So when you start to pick apart the Bible, when you start to reject the portions of it that are clearly incomplete or contradictory, and when you focus entirely on just what was Jesus trying to say to us, forget about the whole thing that he's the lamb and the sacrifice. We're going to get all into that at some point. But I'm telling you, his primary purpose was to refocus us from the law to the law of love. He spread this message throughout the globe before he returned. It was a 20-year journey. There are 20 years missing from Jesus' life. That should disturb you. It's why I had to present it in a coffee talk to get you to think. Isn't that weird that there's a hole there? And why would there be a hole there? I'll tell you another thing. This is one of the reasons I talk about Mary Magdalene without going into any detail, because I'm convinced Jesus was married. Jesus married Mary Magdalene. There's scriptures in the forgotten books or the lost book or the banned books of the Bible. I forget which one it is, but the story is pretty incredible. The story is that Jesus greets Mary Magdalene with a kiss on the mouth. And the disciples are really jealous of their relationship. And they feel like that maybe he's teaching her things that they aren't being taught because of the nature of the relationship. Everything about that scripture implies that they were romantically involved. I'm not here to fight that fight. It's irrelevant. It's just more evidence to me of the necessity for these people to edit Jesus' life to fit their narrative and make it mesh with the idea of the Jewish Messiah and who the Jews thought the Messiah would be. And they have to reconcile who Jesus was versus who they thought he should have been. And they were willing to edit his life, hide portions of it, deceive you to make that meshing happen, to force those two incompatible faiths into one thing. And that is the core problem of all of this. I'm not a bit anti-Semitic. I believe that Jewish people should be free to worship God however they see fit, just like the rest of us. But I have a problem with the Judaism and the Jewish faith being force-fed to Christians, and this creation being made, which causes so much cognitive dissonance. So many people have walked away because it doesn't make sense, right? They failed to put this together properly. Why is your church broken? Why your system doesn't work? Because of this right here. You're not really Christians. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. I reject everything except what he said. It doesn't matter to me. I look at it as wisdom. I look at the Old Testament as history. I see that it's full of glimpses of God and what is to come. But to preach on the Old Testament when the truth of Jesus Christ is, I will never preach anything but Jesus for the rest of my life. I am a Jesus freak from the top down. And so, as I started to unravel this, one of the big turnarounds for me, one of the big changes for me was when I took systematic theology in seminary, when I became trained as a minister. I was trained as a minister from childhood by my dad, but when I was educated in doctrine, I did a study called what was it? I just said it. Hate when I draw a blank. It's morning. I haven't even had coffee this morning. I woke up inspired. But it's called systematic theology or doctrine. And it shows you where these doctrines come from. And the thing is, almost every doctrine that you hold near and dear in modern Christianity was created to solve a problem. There was some kind of problem in the church. There was some kind of problem in the organization, in the body, in the ministry, whatever the problem was. And these were created out of pure fabric, out of whole cloth, from scratch. They were just manifested for the purpose of solving problems. And I don't believe that there's ever been a genuine discussion and a true and pure pursuit of Jesus. It's why I had to do it myself. I never found anyone else who had. Maybe you've discovered other people who have. But the real Jesus is a simple faith. He came to express to us that the entrance into heaven has to do with non-judgmental forgiveness and love. There's another side of Jesus that has to do with power, because we are in an absolute fight with a real live enemy. There's an army of demons who are setting out to make our lives miserable, and they're succeeding at it more than they're losing, unfortunately, and I blame the church for most of that. But there's spiritual power, which is a whole other study of Jesus. He did heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons, make coins appear in fishes' mouths who are swimming free in the river. I mean, the things he did: spit in the ground, make mud, rub mud in a man's eye, and heal him from his blindness. This is what I love about the book of John. The book of John simply talks about love. It simply talks about, in detail, Jesus' miracles, to show that he was who he said he was. The signs and wonders of Jesus and his true message are contained in the book of John. And I really won't ever make any doctrine that doesn't come from there. As I deciphered the New Testament, I became concerned with the narrator of the New Testament. Who is this narrator? Who are the black words, right? The red words are Jesus, but the setup, the framing, the contextual part of it is a narrator. Where did that narration come? Especially in the Synoptic Gospels. There's much less of that in the book of John. In the Synoptic Gospels, it's a lot of narration without ever telling you who the narrator was. And they'll say, well, it's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. No, it's not. The timeline's all messed up. Those people's names were chosen to give those three books more validity. And there's a thing that you're not allowed to even speak of in the pulpit. It's such a secret that we're not allowed to teach on it. We're forbidden to teach on a thing called the Q. The Q was a document that preceded these three Gospels, which is the root. These three Gospels were three different people, three different scribes, who read the Q and rewrote it and filled in the blanks from history, from eyewitnesses, and they created these Gospels, which are almost identical. And that's why John is so different. It didn't come from the Q. It came from the eyewitness. It came from the man who walked with Jesus, ate with Jesus. He sat at the Last Supper with him. And what you don't know is John was the only disciple that was present at the crucifixion. The others ran for their life because John was so young. He was seen as a child with the women more than a threat. And while Peter and all of the other disciples were running for their lives, being pursued by none other than Paul, who was known as Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus is responsible for stoning to death the very first Christian martyr after Jesus, which was Stephen. Stephen was stoned to death, and the man that threw the first stone was none other than the Paul that you guys put so much credit in. And I think people can change and turn around, but I'd still have to say, consider the source. Consider the source of your doctrine. It comes from somebody who pursued Christians to murder them. Successfully. He was an oppressor of the saints. Just forgive, but don't forget. So the rest of the disciples were fleeing for their lives, and Jesus was being crucified, but John was there with the women. He didn't have to flee. So that book is everything to me. It's what I'm about to teach you is from that book, and it's about Jesus's words. And I'm telling you, it coincides perfectly with the teachings of Jesus, the sayings of Jesus that were preserved by these Tibetan monks in the hidden city. And so I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that this deception goes back to the very beginning. It goes back to Jesus's own time. And that these patriarchal people didn't want to accept the role that Mary Magdalene played in this. They discounted John a lot because he was a kid. right? He was young. And the scribes and the Pharisees that invaded your Christian faith, like Paul and others, they sought to combine Judaism and Christianity to make it jive when it's not compatible. This is a new covenant. It is not based on the old covenant. I want you to realize salvation is free. Salvation is because God so loved us. Forget about everything else. It starts and ends with God loves us. The greatest commandment is to love God because he loved us. To love each other because he loves all of us. And when we don't love each other, we don't love him. When we don't forgive each other, he can't forgive us. When we judge other people, he's forced to judge us in the same way by our own behavior. I hope this message gets through to you. The big message is coming. There's going to be part 2 of the big lie. I like to keep these videos under 40 minutes. And the big lie is going to have to come in 2 pieces, because I've talked to you about the beginnings of the big lie. But something happened at the Council of Nicaea. The Constantine, the Emperor of Rome, when he made the Christian faith, the faith of the Roman Empire, he changed it. The Bible's creation was a political creation. The 66 books were chosen for political reasons. And I will prove that to you in the next episode where we talk about the big lie, number 2. And this was the big lie from the beginning. Jesus, his life was edited. They presented him in a way that held up their previous religious preconceptions and ideas. Go to the red letters. Even some of those have been affected by Judaism. Even Jesus is being quoted as saying things that when you, I so want to drop the big secret on you. I so want to, but I have to tend to all of this first. I have to lay the groundwork. I have to do the hard thing to prevent you from experiencing some of the traumatic effects of hearing the truth. I hope to minimize that, and I hope to eliminate some of the coming criticism as I release this thing, because this is the truth. God's brought it to my attention for delivery in this end time, because we are out of time. We got to pull these people back that have rejected the church and Jesus. It's okay, reject the church, accept Jesus. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I am about reclaiming these souls that are born in the light and must return now to the light, even though they wander in the darkness, and much of their wandering is because this thing we call the church just plain don't make sense. Join me next time as we talk about how we got to where we are. May God bless you. May God keep you. May his face shine upon you. May the Holy Spirit guide you in all your ways, and may the blessings of God pour out on you like a living water flowing from his belly. The living water, that's what we're talking about. The truth. Truth and the way. All right.